in March 1979. 3 days after the peace agreement was signed with Menachem Begin and President of Egypt, Anwar al-Sadat, Menachem Begin comes to New York City and requests from the consulate in New York to meet families that were making Aliyah that week to Israel. I will tell you, I was the lucky one who was chosen to go meet with the Prime Minister. We came to the Waldorf Astoria, and I, with 5 or 6 other families, sat in his huge suite, and he then called us over, and I remember climbing into his lap, and he said to me, do you know any words of Hebrew? I was 3.5, and I said, I only know one. He looked at me quizzically, and he said, what is it? I said, Shalom. And this man, okay, he was the Prime Minister of Israel, turned into like mush. Honestly, like he became this grandfather-like figure that you could see that his heart just almost burst. And frankly, as I think about that story, and I think of where we are today and where we've come from in the last 40 or so years, this really is a Shechianu moment. 70 odd years ago, 72 years ago, when the first Prime Minister of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, stood at the lectern, no one, I think, could have predicted a day like today. And frankly, when he stood at that lectern, the Prime Minister of Israel said 2 things. First, he said, the gates of Israel are officially open, that our moment had finally arrived as the Jewish people, and that we were welcome to come home. The gates are officially open, and that was frankly enshrined in the national anthem of Israel, Hatikva bat shnot alpayim. The hope has been around for 2,000 years, and for 2,000 years, friends, we have been waiting for the moment to have the ability to go home and to sign peace agreements in the region. Ben-Gurion also said something else that was really incredible. He said, Israel has been granted the great privilege and the obligation to tackle some of the gravest challenges of the 20th century. Today, my friends, we are seeing Israel having been granted, and frankly, all of us in this room, or in this proverbial virtual room, Israel has been granted the great privilege and the obligation to tackle some of the gravest challenges of the 21st century. And I will tell you that I, for one, am extraordinarily excited about the decade that's ahead, based on all the interviews and all the innovators that I've had the great privilege to meet over the course of the last few years. Now, based on Susan's bio, nothing in that bio really suggests that I would have been a techie. I spent most of my career looking at radical Islam, terrorism finance, money laundering, and somewhere in the summer of 2014, my professional career really took a pretty radical turn. And that turn took place on July.
You're getting going. I don't think so.
Someone needs to mute.
Yeah.
All good?
What?
I think we need to mute.
Oh, okay. So on July the 4th, I'll never forget, my kids were very angry because we missed the fireworks. We boarded a flight for Israel, and I took my then almost 2-year-old to Jerusalem. And when we landed, we have a home in Jerusalem. We landed, all was good. And the next day, I went to the little preschool around the block. And the owner of the preschool was shocked when I walked in the door. She said, Mr. Jorisch, what are you doing here? I said, what do you mean? I've spoken to you on the phone. I'm here to enroll my almost 2-year-old in your preschool. She said, haven't you heard? There's a war that's about to break out between Hamas and Israel. You ought to go home to America where it's nice and safe. And I remember looking at her like she had just grown a 3rd ear. I said, what do you mean go home? I am home. Please enroll my child at your preschool. And she did it, albeit reluctantly. And all was fine until about 3 days later. When I came driving home from that preschool, I heard the most horrible noise of my life. As a young parent, we all want to protect our children. And as I was driving back from the preschool, I was listening to the radio, and I heard the sound of the code red heralding the beginning of war. And I want you to know, I looked in the back, I looked to my sleeping toddler, and my stomach literally, I wanted to vomit. I almost was sick. And I thought to myself, ooh, this wasn't such a good idea to come home. This was not a good idea to come to Israel. It's one thing to, as an adult, come to a war zone. It's quite another to bring your sleeping toddler to a war zone. And I knew exactly what was coming. So I took him home, and we We did tubby time. We did story time. I took him to bed. I put him to bed. And then I waited. And sure enough, 3 hours later, the sirens wailed. And I took a terrified toddler down 4 flights of stairs, where I should tell you that my neighbors looked more terrified than my 2-year-old, my almost 2-year-old. And we're all huddled in the bomb shelter, and it's very dark. And we wait about 10 minutes. And friends, after about 10 minutes, our building violently shakes. And we hear 2 booms. Does anyone know what that sound was? Given that you're all muted, I will tell you, it was the sound of history being made. It was the sound of the Iron Dome hitting its target. Up until that moment in time, you only heard about those sorts of things in Star Wars. You didn't really, a rocket goes up, another rocket goes up. Generally, when a rocket goes up until then, the rocket would go down and hit a random target. This was among the first times in history that when a rocket went up, another one met it in midair with, I should tell you, 90 to 95% accuracy. And we knew that it was safe to go upstairs. Me, along with all the citizens of the state of Israel, were protected that night by an extraordinary innovation known as the Iron Dome. And I will tell you that scene repeated itself over the course of that summer many, many, many times, going into bomb shelters, pulling off on the side of the road. It was a fairly harrowing summer. And on the one hand, I will tell you, it was the most depressing summer of my life. In Egypt, you had terrorists running around the Sinai Peninsula. In Lebanon, Hezbollah had a vice grip over the country. Iran was marching towards a nuclear bomb. And in Iraq, ISIS had just beheaded my friend and colleague, Steve Sotloff, who I will tell you I knew for many years, and it was extraordinarily depressing. On the other hand, it was probably the most inspiring summer of my life. I began to realize that Israeli innovations were not only improving the lives of millions of people, but billions of people in the realms of medicine, science, agriculture, food. It was really an extraordinary moment in time. I had been going to Israel my whole life. And I will tell you, I, for one, was not aware of this particular story. And so I began to dig. How is it possible that a country the size of New Jersey has more startups combined than Canada, India, Japan, Korea, and the United Kingdom combined? How is it possible that a country that is basically like a desert, 60% desert, has more companies listed on the NASDAQ than any other country other than the United States and China? I didn't really know what to do with that information. And so my journey began. I knew that I needed to dig in deep and figure out what is the secret of Israel's success. And for those of you who have read the amazing book about Startup Nation, Israel, of course, as you know, is called the Startup Nation. Startup Nation was a wonderful book, but the Startup Nation was really about how Israelis make money. And the more conversations I had, the more I began to realize there's a much, much, much deeper narrative that's taking place in Israel, and it's a story that is not well told. And if you allow me, I'll just tell you a few of the stories that started to really inspire me and ultimately forced me to write this book, Thou Shalt Innovate, which yesterday came out in Arabic. It's currently out in 25 languages, and it will be out in 41 by the end of 2021 and still counting. And I will tell you that journey has surprised no one more than me. I'm still scratching my head at why countries like Burma, Thailand, Vietnam, Norway are interested in Israeli technology and how Israeli technology makes the world a better place. It does my heart good every time I get a phone call from a reporter who wants to know about Israel and some country that I really have a hard time identifying on a map, I will tell you. So my favorite story I'll start with is United Rescue. I don't, most of you I can't see, unfortunately. I see pictures of you. I'm going to assume that many of you have been to Israel sometime over the last 10 years. And I never noticed, I have to admit, I just never really noticed these little motorcycles that go around the country. For those of you who haven't been in a while, you see around the country these orange and red motorcycles everywhere. They they feel like literally like little mosquitoes everywhere in the country. And I didn't really know what they were. And a friend of mine suggested that I go speak to a man by the name of Eli Beer. Eli Beer is the founder of an organization called United Rescue, or Echud Hatzalah in Hebrew, or United Hatzalah. And I went and I interviewed Eli Beer, and immediately it became clear to me that this organization, this founder, had done 3 extraordinary things. The first is he banded together 6,000 emergency responders, Muslims, Christians, and Jews. That was really interesting. Muslims, Christians, and Jews working together to save lives. Wow, that's not something I had seen every day. And then secondly, all of you, I would imagine, in your pocket have this amazing little device called a smartphone. Now, most of us use our smartphones to make calls, check out apps, and when we, up until COVID hit, when we wanted to get into a cab, we don't call cabs anymore. That's so 1975. Most of us, we press a little button and magically Uber or Lyft or Via or Get arrives at our door within a few minutes, okay? Eli Beer, before the smartphone came out, created an amazing little app to, instead of calling a cab, he geospatially located the 5 nearest emergency responders. And if that wasn't sufficient, he gave many of his emergency responders this little moped-like device with a box in the back that looks like it's delivering pizzas for Pizza Hut. But instead, what it's actually doing is it's delivering an emergency responder. And that little box in the back, it has medical supplies. Friends, if I were to have a heart attack right now in Washington, D.C., on average, it would take somewhere between 21 and 23 minutes for an ambulance to arrive at my home. In a country like Israel, which has experienced war and terrorism over the course of the last 72 years on a regular basis, 21 to 23 minutes, which is incidentally the national average in Israel and most places in the world, is way too long. I'm glad you're all sitting down. Friends, does anyone happen to know, maybe you can put it in the chat, does anyone happen to know what the national average is in Israel for an emergency responder to get to the scene of an emergency? Not an ambulance, but an emergency responder. Does anybody know? No? From Angela Weck, 6 minutes. Does anyone else have any other guesses? No? I'll tell you, it's 3 minutes. And in every major city in Israel, Tel Aviv, Haifa, Jerusalem, Beersheba, Modi'in, the national average, my friends, is 90 seconds. I don't get to say Scooby-Doo, and literally someone comes to save my life. Now, for those of you who don't speak Hebrew, I imagine that many of you have done a Passover Seder. This is like, it would be Dayenu. It would be sufficient if this was just a model that worked in Israel. Eli has done something else that's really extraordinary. He's taken his model and he's expanded it to about 10 countries around the world, including right here in the United States. Jersey City became the first place in America to roll out this model. And I will tell you, friends, there's no reason why we don't have this in every city in the United States. There's no reason why we don't have this in Washington, D.C., New York, San Francisco, L.A., Chicago, Peoria. Friends, we have hundreds of millions of emergency responders. Every one of them has a smartphone. This is a free app. And I think we can put together a few shekels for these ambicycles. Pizza Hut did it. I think so can we. And so ultimately, my hope and desire is that by the time we meet again in the years to come, every city around the world has scaled up this cheap, scalable model in order to save lives. 90 seconds to save a life. When you save one life, it's as if you saved the entire world. Let's go through a second series of innovations. As I mentioned, Israel is 60% desert, and I will tell you that Israel is the world's one and only water superpower. I'll repeat that because I think it's worth remembering. Israel is the world's one and only water superpower. It does not depend on the weather, and it does not depend on its neighbors for its water consumptions. It is completely water independent, and it has done that leveraging 5 different innovations. Some of them were created in Israel, some of them were created abroad. All of them, as the model really shows in Israel, the sum of the whole is greater than its parts. So the first one is desalination. Israel has 5 desalination plants It did not create desalination. Interestingly, the man, Sidney Loeb, who created reverse osmosis desalination, was a professor in California, but he perfected the system in Beersheba. He made Aliyah and perfected it 2 years later in the mid-60s, I apologize. Now, that's pretty extraordinary, but what really is extraordinary is that Israel has created over 300 desalination plants in 30 countries around the world, including the largest desalination plant in the Western Hemisphere in California, and the largest desalination plant in India and in China. Let's look at, now you all are in Peoria. I would imagine that many of you have gardens. And for those of you who don't have a garden, you've seen a garden. Many gardens in the United States have something called these little drip irrigation tubes. Okay, what it is you can buy these at Home Depot. It's these little plastic tubes that emit a micro amount of water. That was created by Simcha Blas in the mid-1960s. That technology today not only waters your gardens in Peoria, but it basically is used by over 1 billion, that's right, that's millions with a B, over 1 billion farmers around the world depend on this technology. And that is mind-boggling. I'd like to talk about recycling of wastewater. When we all go to the toilet in the United States, Americans tend to think of our sewage as being disgusting. The idea of sewage doesn't make any of us very happy. In Israel, it's actually, sewage water is the most valuable commodity you can probably buy or sell. It's more expensive. It's extraordinarily expensive. So let me be clear what I mean. In the United States, we flush our toilets. Our water authorities clean it generally, not always, but generally twice. And then that water is sent right back into our rivers and our oceans. In Israel, not so much. In Israel, what happens is first the waste is removed, and then it's used as fertilizer. Nothing is wasted. And then that water is cleaned 5 times, and 90% of that water is used for agricultural purposes. I will tell you that you could technically drink that water, but the idea of drinking sewage water is a little disgusting, so Israel doesn't do it. But I will tell you that solution is coming to a tap near you. 40 out of our 50 US states are going to experience massive water shortages over the course of the next decade, unless we do things differently, and it doesn't appear like we are. You will all be drinking sewage water. I think that's disgusting, but it's just the way it's going to be. And then Singapore drinks that water. I didn't know that. Andrew, thank you for sharing. I didn't know that's a news bulletin to me. And then lastly, Israel uses something fairly revolutionary that was actually created in the United States. It's called the 2-button toilet. Are you ready? Button 1, button 2, number 1, number 2. Okay? And as a result of these 4 innovations, Israel has more water than it knows what to do with. Now, that's important under any given circumstance. Now let's talk about geopolitically why it's important, and frankly, how it's driving politics in the region tomorrow and over the course of the next decade. Egypt, a country that I lived in for not a short amount of time, in 5 years, in 2025, I keep wanting to ask questions, but everyone is on mute, and I see lots of pictures. In 2025, Egypt is going to run out of water. Friends, that's in 5 years. It's a country of 100 million people is going to run out of water. They're going to experience, a water problem of biblical proportions. I mean, we are in for quite a journey, for both good and for bad, and over the course of the next decade. Iran, a country that has 80 million people and points its missiles at Israel today, in about 10 to 15 years, over 50% of its population are going to become water refugees. You're going to hear that term over and over again. And that same trend line holds true in many countries in the Middle East and in Europe. They're predicting in the next 15 to 20 years, the UK is going to run out of water. Many parts of Africa are already experiencing massive water shortages and don't have water. And here you have a country like Israel, which has basically solved this particular problem. South Africa, in Johannesburg and Cape Town. Cape Town was on the brink of running out of water last year. We are seeing Israel coming up with very creative solutions to truly make the world a better place. For those of you that either have Parkinson's or know someone that does, Israel has created extraordinary technology. Let me take a step back. DBS, deep brain stimulation, was created in the 1970s, late 1970s, early 1980s, by a Frenchman by the name of Jean-Louis Ben Abid. But it took an Israeli at the Hebrew University a few years later to discover that in order to reduce the symptoms associated with Parkinson's, you needed to get to the basal ganglia, which is right at the base of the brain. The problem is, if you don't get to that exact spot, you turn someone into a vegetable, or worse, you kill them. And so scientists discovered that every part of the brain emits a unique sound signature. And so an Israeli-Arab couple by the name of Imad and Reem Yunus that live in Nazareth, they created the world's most effective, most advanced GPS for the brain that allows brain surgeons all over the world to get to the exact spot in the brain to treat neurological diseases like essential tremor, like Parkinson's, like Tourette's, and so on and so forth, to get right to the part of the brain that actually needs it. And I could literally go on and on. Look, I'll give you one more wonderful and heartening yet very sad story. My friend Amit Gofer, a few years ago, had a very unfortunate ATV accident. He snapped his neck and he became a quadriplegic. He became, understandably, extraordinarily depressed. He knew he was never going to walk again. And so, you know how we have a skeleton, we have an internal skeleton. He started to wonder, he understood that his spine was broken and was never going to be fixed. He started to wonder if there were any creatures on the planet that didn't have a skeleton, but rather an exoskeleton. And he discovered very quickly that there are animals that have an exoskeleton, like crabs, armadillos, scorpions, lobsters, all have skeletons on the outside of their bodies. And so he created the world's first exoskeleton. He, unfortunately, was not able to benefit from the exoskeleton. An exoskeleton, friends, is like it's a battery on the back and has these devices that hug the legs. And that 10 years ago, is that right? 10 years ago, allowed the first paraplegic, in other words, an individual that has no use of their legs, for the first time in the history of mankind, to stand up and walk. Now, if that's not sufficient, 5 years ago, the world's first paraplegic ran the London Marathon for the first time. And I want to tell you, it's one of the most, I would encourage you later this evening, take a little note, watch a video. You could type in Amit Gofer, an exoskeleton. I want you to know, I cry every time I watch those videos. They really are extraordinary. He himself, because he was a quadriplegic, was not able to benefit from his own device. And so 3 years ago, he created something called the Up and Ride. All of you have seen the Segways, I'm sure. So he created a Segway-like device that allows quadriplegics to stand up and see their loved ones and get around. It's extraordinarily moving. And which begs the question, my friends, again, why is a country the size of New Jersey putting through technology that's curing the sick, feeding the hungry, helping the needy, and making the world a better place? And after hundreds of interviews, I basically distilled the secret of Israel's success into three main characteristics. And I'll share them with you this evening because it really is, I still find it, I've given this talk thousands of times, and I will tell you, Rennie will tell you, I still find this extraordinarily exciting and really inspiring. The first secret of Israel's success is diversity. Israel is one of the most diverse places on the planet. Muslims, Christians, and Jews. There are Muslims of every stripe and every variety. Sunni, Shia, Bedouin, Circassian, Alavi, you name it, they've got it. Christians of every stripe and every denomination. Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant, so on and so forth. And then you have Jews from over 100 countries in the world. I always say that diversity powers the Israeli technological ecosystem. The second secret of Israel's success are the secular institutions that the country reveres. And I use that word, I'll repeat it. Israelis revere their secular institutions. And frankly, the two institutions they revere the most are the military and its university system. All but one of Israel's universities are secular and promote secular values. And then lastly, I'd like to talk about this last portion of this in a very cultural context, not in a religious context. No matter what your religious views are, I think we can all agree that culturally speaking, the Jewish people has had a very strong prophetic tradition over the course of the last 3,500 years or so. For the last, 1,500 years or so, Jews have been praying 3 times a day the Aleinu prayer. And the Aleinu prayer calls upon us to letaken olam b'malachut Shaddai, to repair the world in the image of God. The Mishnah, no less than 10 times, instructs us to engage in tikkun olam, the idea of repairing the world. The prophet Isaiah calls upon us to bring more light to the world. The important thing is light. And that's a commandment for all people, is to bring more light. And you cannot repeat the words of curing the sick, feeding the hungry, helping the needy, day in and day out, and for that not to have a deep cultural impact on the DNA of your people. And I'll prove it to you. I'll give you one more example. On Friday night when I bless my children, and on Saturday night when we make Havdalah, the quintessential Jewish prayer basically is Lahavdil ben kodesh lechol ve'or lechoshech, to separate between the holiness and the mundane, and the separation between light and darkness. And from my experience, and from all the research that I've done, Israel's founding fathers and mothers were deeply inspired by this prophetic tradition. And when Ben Gurion stood at that lectern and said that members of the Jewish tribe are welcome to come home. And again, I want to be clear, I'm not telling you to go home. I'm just telling you that right exists. And more importantly, that right has been given to members of the Jewish faith, to all of you in the room today that are members of the Jewish faith, to you, but more importantly, for your children, your grandchildren, and your grandchildren's grandchildren. This is a right that will never, ever, ever be taken away again. And when Ben Gurion said that we've been granted the great privilege to tackle some of the greatest, Israel's been granted the great privilege to tackle some of the greatest challenges of the 20th century, what we're seeing today is Israeli technology tackling some of the gravest challenges of the 21st century. Now look, I want to be clear, a few things. First, Israel is an amazing place, but it's not the most technologically advanced place in the world. Okay, I don't want any of you to walk away saying, this guy Avi Jorisch, great lecturer, amazing guy, loved hearing him speak, beautiful. But Israel is not the most technologically advanced place in the world today. It's probably 3 or 4. There are a few other countries that are ahead of it, where Israel, and that's according to the Bloomberg Index, every year it changes just a little bit, where Israel really does, in my opinion, excel and is number 1 in the world, is technologies that are based on curing the sick, feeding the hungry, and helping the needy, and making the world a better place. Now, I also want to point out that Israel is not a Gan Eden. It's not a paradise. For those of you who have been, you know it's got tons of problems between the very rich and the very poor, problems with its Arab neighbors, problems with the Palestinians, problems with terrorism, problems, tons of problems. The reason I chose to tell this story is because I really truly believe this is an untold, uncovered story in Israel. The idea that you're leveraging technology to cure the sick, feed the hungry, helping the needy, it's not a story that is often told at dinner parties. It's generally not considered the story to share. I do want to relay to you one more personal story. This is about 4 years ago. 4 years ago, I came home from work, and when I walked in, I could tell that something was not quite right. The mother of my children, Eliana, she looked at me and she said, "We all know the look, and we all know the look that one gets, and you know something's not quite right." And so she told my then 5-year-old, my oldest child, she said, "Aiden, tell your father what you've done." And my 5-year-old wasn't terribly excited to tell me what naughty thing he had done that day. And so Eliana came over to me and literally whispered in my ear. She said, "Aiden told a homeless person that he was a very bad man." And I'll tell you, I come from a family of survivors. And after doing all these interviews, I was a young father. I'm still relatively a young father, although after COVID, I'm definitely not a young father. I've spent a lot more time with my children than I ever thought possible. I wanted to crawl under a desk and hide. And so I asked my son, I said, we live here in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill. And it was March. It's still quite cold in Washington in March. And so I asked him to get his shoes on and his jacket on. And we got about halfway down the block, and I knelt down at eye level, and I said, Aiden, why did you tell that homeless person that he's a bad man? And he didn't know the answer to that question. So I decided to probe just a little bit more. I said, was it because he's black? Because he smells of urine? Because he's surrounded by plastic bags? Why would you say that? And he just didn't know the answer. This 5-year-old just didn't really know the answer to the question. So then I said, Aiden, what are the 5 rules that we have in the Jorisch home? Because in my home, just like I was raised, we only have 5 rules. And I invite you to Washington. I invite you to meet my children. Every one of my children, and I have 3 boys, they can all tell you the 5 rules of the Jorisch home. They'll rattle it off to you. So he said, rule number 1 is to be a mensch, not a vildachaya. And for those of you who don't speak Yiddish, literally being a mensch means a good person, and a vildachaya means a wild animal. So I said, rule number 1, be a mensch, not a vildachaya. Rule number 2 is make the world a better place. Rule number 3, try your hardest. Rule number 4, never ever give up. And rule number 5, try and have a good time. I said, great job, Aiden. What do we do when we make a mistake? He said, we do tzedakah, Baba. I said, that's right, we do tzedakah. Now, we generally translate that word into English as charity. But the truth of the matter is the root of the word tzedakah means justice. In this particular instance, it means social justice. I said, excellent. So here's the way this is going to go, Aiden. We're going to find that homeless person. We're going to give them a couple of bucks. I want you to look them in the eye, shake their hand, and say, God bless you and keep you safe. He says, Daddy, I can do that. No problem. So we walk a few more blocks, and we find a group of 3 homeless people. And Aiden, true to form, and I will tell you, very unhappy scene. I mean, this was urine. It was just not it was not a wonderful sight to behold. Aiden literally marches right up to this homeless person. He looks him in the eye. He says, God bless you and keep you safe. And he hands him a couple of bucks. And do you know what happened in that moment? Nothing. Literally, this guy is looking at my son, and my son is looking at him, and there's this very awkward moment of silence. And then do you know what happened? This homeless person, literally, he hugs my child. I mean, he literally hugs my child in a bear hug. And then these 3 guys are having the best time of their life. They're high-fiving. Your son is this little angel. What a wonderful little boy. God bless you and keep you safe. Really, this was the first human interaction these guys have had in a very, very long time. I thank them for their time. After a few minutes, we walk away. I kneel down. And again, I say, Aiden, what just happened here? And Aiden thinks for a moment, and he says, Baba, I made the world a better place, and it feels good. And when I think about that story, and I think about the state of Israel, and I think about the Jewish people, I'm reminded that the Torah tells us, Pirkei Avot technically tells us that the world was built on 3 things: Torah, Avodah, and Gemilut Chasadim. The world was built on Torah, which literally technically translates into the Bible, but you'll excuse me, but I translate that into values. And the Jewish people have an amazing set of values, but the truth of the matter is that's universal. That's Muslims, Christians, and Jews. Muslims have amazing values, Christians have amazing values, Jews have amazing values. The first leg is Torah. The basis is good values. The second is avodah, or work. No one would have believed, my Holocaust survivor grandparents, were they alive today, and the founders of the state of Israel 72 years ago would never have believed that Israel has more startups combined than Canada, India, Japan, Korea, and the United Kingdom combined. Friends, this is extraordinary. And the idea of Gemilut Chasadim, the ideas of acts of charity and kindness, Israel today is leveraging its best asset tech to cure the sick, feed the hungry, help the needy, way, way, way beyond the borders of the state of Israel. And here's what I would encourage you to think about this evening. Were we in a room together, I would encourage you to look to your left and look to your right. Unfortunately, there's no one to your left and to your right this evening, but let's pretend that, as you look at all these boxes, you can look to the person to your left and look to the person to your right, okay? I would encourage you to really look to your left and to your right and realize that the only people that are going to move the dial on the issues that we collectively care about are you. And I'll take this a step further. I'm going to be kind. The average age of the participants in the room today is 40. Okay, I'll be generous. The next time I speak to your federation, you would do me the great privilege. I like all of you. You guys are lovely, lovely people. But the truth of the matter is, I'm going to level with you. I'm not really interested in you. I'm really interested in your children. And I'm really, really, really interested in your grandchildren. And I will tell you, for myself, I am so passé. I put myself in the same category as you, okay? I'm like the old timer. When I look at my children, I realize that is what I care about. That is what we collectively care about. And so the next time I come to Peoria, I would like to meet your children, and I would like to meet your grandchildren. Those are the ones that I really want to talk to because they represent the next generation. Now, all of you, I hope, will come to Israel and you will visit. And I suspect that some of you, if not all of you, go with some regularity. I beg you, I implore you, take your children and take your grandchildren. And the truth of the matter is, I don't want you to, wait, we need to have you speak. Let's see, is it more slowly? Or we need to have you speak on campus someday. I'm happy to come to campus. I want you to do me a great favor. Frankly, I want you to do yourselves a great favor. And I don't want you to only go to the traditional places that everybody goes. Masada and the Kotel and the Midrachov. Beautiful. Go. But there's a few other places I'd really like for you to go as well. And that I want you to take your children and your grandchildren. I want you to take your grandchildren and your children to United Hatzalah. It's one thing for me to sit here and tell you that Muslims, Christians, and Jews work together to save lives. That's beautiful. But you don't really know it in your kishkas. You don't know it in your inside. I take my children, I will tell you, every single year I take my children to United Hatzalah headquarters. Do you know why? Because it inspires them. My 5, 7, and 9-year-olds will tell you today they don't want to drive cars. Do you know why? Because they want to ride an ambucycle to save lives. That's why you have to take your children to United Hatzalah headquarters, so that they themselves feel it in their bones. I want you to take them to the Technion. I want you to take your children to the Weizmann Institute so that you can see where drugs are created to cure the sick, feed the hungry, help the needy. Friends, I will also ask you for another favor. I will ask you to read my book. Honestly, I don't need you to read my book. I'm asking you to read my book so that I want you to internalize these stories for yourselves. God willing, when we all come out of COVID and we start having dinner parties again, frankly, I want you to have these stories and internalize them for yourselves. When I visit your homes, and I hope to visit your homes, Rini, I hope my book is not on your bookshelf. I really hope that my book is not in your home. Do you know why? When I visit Rini, I want her to tell me that she's given my book to somebody else. Truly, you would do me a great favor if you would buy the book, read it, and I don't want to see it on your bookshelf. Give it to somebody else. These are the stories that I hope will define us, and frankly, are what I hope will inspire your children and your grandchildren. For too long, members of the Jewish faith, we've been tying our next generation in two, I would say, not so positive ways. The first is through the Holocaust. And I will tell you, I was raised by my grandparents. My grandmother had a tattoo from Auschwitz her whole life. I was raised by Holocaust survivors. And my earliest memories are of Auschwitz, truly. And I say this with no joy and with no glee. And that casts a very, very long shadow. And that message is a very, very hard one to give over to the next generation. And secondly, it's a positive connection to the state of Israel. All too often over the course of the last few years, when you go to campus, when you speak to college students, they're extraordinarily uncomfortable because the images that they're seeing on television between Israel and the Palestinians, very, very hard to stomach. Whether you're on the left or you're on the right, you love Netanyahu, you hate Netanyahu. I'm not even taking a position on any of that. The images of television are painful. They're just painful to watch. Friends, the next generation, I'm not just spinning you a good story. This is the essence. It's our greatest hope and desire. It's the most sublime hope of the Jewish people and the state of Israel to cure the sick, feed the hungry, help the needy, and make the world a better place. And that is why I hope when you go, that is the Israel that I hope that you will show your children. There is no denying the fact that Israel is an extraordinarily complicated country, but its innovators are bound together not by religion, money, or stature, but rather by a desire to cure the sick, feed the hungry, help the needy, and make the world a better place. And whether you're on the left or you're on the right, I challenge you to stand with the innovators that I feature in my book, because each and every one of them is playing an outsized role in making the world a better place. And those are the people that I hope that your children and your grandchildren will look up to. And with that, my friends, I will wish you a Shana Tova. I will wish you a Shechianu moment for all that we will see tomorrow and in the years ahead. I will tell you that Israel's future is very, very bright. The future belongs to countries that innovate. Israel today is leading the pack. Israel today is with all its problems, is an extraordinarily inspiring place. Shana Tova, Gmar Chatima Tova, and a happy Zisa New Year to all of you. I'm happy to take a few questions. If you want to put them in the chat, I'd be glad to answer any and all questions.
Thank you, Avi. That was fabulous. I love your book. It was
Thank you.
It was inspiring. Does anybody have any questions?
I promise I'm bald, but I don't bite. And even if I did, I couldn't do it through Zoom. What do you got, friends? Come on. Any questions you got?
Why do you think the ambucycle has not taken off in larger cities?
It hasn't taken off because of mayors. There's a whole host. Our emergency responder system in the United States is like a Swiss cheese. Everyone is responsible for very different jurisdictions. It's going to require tremendous leadership in order to, as Eli Beer likes to say, it takes a crazy person with a tremendous vision to do this. You've got to really be dogged. We need another million Elis. We need another million Eli Beers.
Aviv Ezra had recommended that for Chicago. I don't know how far he got with it, but I know that was one of his agendas.
I'll tell you a funny story about Chicago. Rini I don't know if you were at the talk that I gave there was a talk I gave that was honoring the Brodsky family. If any of you know the Brodsky family in Chicago, this was 2 years ago. This was an extraordinary dinner because your incoming governor and your at the time it was Pritzker, and who was the governor before of the state of Illinois? Was it Brown?
Browner.
Browner was in the room. Pritzker was in the room. Rahm Emanuel was in the room, like Democrats and Republicans, and everyone was in the room. And I looked Pritzker straight in the eye, and I said, "Governor Pritzker." And I happened to know him through a number of mutual friends. I said, "I challenge you. We are." And he had gotten up to the lectern before me, and he had said, "We're in the greatest state, in the greatest country in the entire world." And I said something to the effect of, I said, "Governor Pritzker, you're right. We are in the greatest state, in the greatest country in the entire world. But the greatest state and the greatest country in the entire world deserves ambucycles. We want to save lives in 90 seconds or less. The next time I come to Chicago, you would do me a great service if we'd have a few ambucycles here." Could I tell you why? You require a crazy person. I hope, LaDonna, that you will be. I hope that you are this crazy person and bring it to Peoria. I mean, truly, if you want to bring this to Peoria, it would be my great pleasure to introduce you to all the right people in United Hatzalah. They would be delighted to work with you to bring it to Peoria. I can tell you this would be an amazing story for your city. It's not even that complicated. You have, I'm sure of it, in Peoria, which is not a huge place. It's not huge. You have hundreds of thousands. I can Google this. Hundreds of thousands of emergency responders. Every one of them has a smartphone, and I'm sure we can raise a couple of dollars. Even with the 17 people that we have on this call, we can raise enough dollars to have a few ambucycles. I'm sure of it. Wow, what news it would bring your city if we could do this.
Okay.
Avi, my name is Andrew Louis. I am the Director of Innovation and Startups at the Greater Peoria Economic Development Council. And my role is specifically in getting traction like that here. So I've already reached out to you on LinkedIn. I look forward to reaching out to Susan as well. This is the first time I'm on this call, so I'm very excited to hear about these opportunities for collaboration. I look forward to more.
It would be my great pleasure, and if at any point you want me to connect you to the folks with any of the innovations that are featured in my book, truly, if you don't have the book, you can easily get it on Amazon, Thou Shalt Innovate. And if any of those innovations spark your curiosity or your fancy, I would be more than delighted to introduce you to any of the innovators that are featured in the book. It would be my great pleasure to help out your city at any time, at any place.
Thank you. And I don't know how much you know about Peoria, but historically we've been a place of piloting and exploring opportunities that have gone on to scale around the world, of course, with Caterpillar. But more recently with BumpBox's 20 million last year, an e-subscription box service for pregnant mothers and newborns, and others. There are multiple things that are happening here. We have a new innovation hub that is coming out of the ground, currently in design phase. There's so much going on here. So we're very excited to explore this further.
I would love to see. I wish I could have given this talk in Peoria this evening. I mean, Susan and I have been. Susan, how long have we been emailing for? I mean, I think our first email goes back 2 years, a year and a half. I'm sorry, I don't remember. A very, very long time. Were it not for COVID, I would have been delivering this talk this evening in Peoria. I'm genuinely sorry that I can't see each and every one of you in person. It makes me. Look, as Susan tells you in my bio, I run 2 companies. I love speaking because. All I'm trying to do is inspire you to truly inspire your own children and do your own part to make the world a better place. And I will tell you, I don't expect any one of you to have the next great startup. The truth of the matter is each and every one of us can make the world a better place by opening the door, smiling, visiting the sick. The whole point of this, if you take nothing else out of this evening's talk, is let's bring more light to the world. The world revolves around light. The more light we have, the better off we are. And I will tell you, once I started looking at the world through a vision of light and darkness, it really changes the whole equation. It really does change the whole equation.
I have a question sitting next to
But Brenda's very pleased that you're in Boston and you feel that it's not in Peoria. You know what? I'd be happy to come to Boston too, anytime. My business partner's in Boston. I'd be happy to come. No one more than me loves Boston. And frankly, I have dreams of Martha's Vineyard. You invite me to Boston, I go to the vineyard right away. No problem. I take invitations to Boston any day of the week.
So my husband's sitting next to me. He has a question about the ambu cycle. So we're fascinated with that. Have they put them any place where there's bad weather, where they have winter?
It's a very good question. Panama does not. Jersey City has terrible weather. Okay, so Jersey City has terrible. The answer to that is yes. But the truth of the matter is, I wouldn't compare it to where they are today. I would compare it to where does Pizza Hut have its mopeds or Domino's has its mopeds, because it's frankly, it's the same innovation, whether you're delivering pizza or you're delivering an ambucycle rider, it's the same.
They don't have those here.
Well, we happen to know somebody who maybe can bring those to Peoria. We'll see.
I would be glad to make the connection. Anybody else?
Else have any questions?
Ella has a question. Ella, just unmute yourself and fire away.
Thanks, Avi, and thank you so much for your inspiration. So you shared places that you would like us to take children and grandchildren. I teach for a small private university, and I have done this before. I've taken students to Israel for a entrepreneurship and innovation class.
Yep.
I'm getting ready to launch another program, and I've already started in motion to take students. God willing, we can travel then, spring of 22. What are some places that because I have an agenda, but what would you recommend to take students to really expose them to innovation?
Also, I would tell you, go through my book and to choose three, any three of the innovations that are listed, 5, choose a number and take them to the headquarters of any one of those places. Read the book, find what inspires you personally, and then truly pick up the phone and call any of these guys. They would be delighted to give you a tour. They would be delighted to speak to your students. They would be overjoyed to speak to your students.
Super.
Is what I would tell you to do. Israel is one of the most welcoming, you know this if you've been before,
Yes.
It's one of the most welcoming countries in the world. All these phone numbers are on their websites. Every one of them, from the CEO of Waze, I don't want to say to the Prime Minister's office, but you get the idea. Like it's a very flat and relaxed country. And frankly, everyone's connected through one degree of separation anyway. Once you talk to Chaim Shmulik, he knows Chaim Pipik, who gets you right through the door. I mean, truly.
And no, I've done Google in Tel Aviv and Waze and Mobileye and SodaStream.
The one place that you probably have not done recently is the Taglit Innovation Center in Tel Aviv. And the Shimon Peres, the Peres Center for Peace and Prosperity opened up only recently and before COVID. And those are the two places that I suspect that you have not been yet. And that would be a wonderful place to take your students.
So what was the name of the second? Because Taglit I've actually been to 3 years ago, and it was amazing. I love the hands-on.
Yeah. And the Shimon Peres, who was one of the last presidents of Israel, he's the Shimon Peres Center for Peace and Prosperity, I think is the full name.
Is it prosperity or is it sustainability or?
Oh, so someone saying it's Peres Center for Peace and Innovation. Sorry, not Prosperity Innovation. Sorry.
And we can help you out. Yeah, we can help you out with that at the consulate. So maybe I can exchange emails with you through Sue, and we can help you out and make the connection as well.
Look, I will also tell you, I'm actually very jealous of each and every one of you. Rini will tell you, one of my best friends in the world is Consulate General Ezra. You have a tremendous resource at the consulate. I mean, truly, you don't know how lucky you are. Aviv Ezra is one of the few diplomats that I know that is universally loved everywhere. I mean, we were joking before the call. I mean, you know, I was going, as we got onto this call, I was going to joke that I was going to introduce him as Ambassador Ezra or Foreign Minister Ezra. He really has a very bright future ahead of him. And I would encourage you to build whatever connections you can to the consulate. It is really your gateway to the state of Israel. And you have people there that truly want to help you. First of all, they're Midwest nice, you know that. But more than that, they're super connected. Aviv is there to help you. These people are there to help you. And so I would, in my experience, you have no one better to help you than someone like Rini and someone like Aviv and his wife Einat. You really are just legit.
Thank you.
Ela, I will give you that information. Ela and I are both in Rockford. And Susan, I hope you don't mind. I had to loan my link to somebody. So seems to be 2 Goldie Pekarskis. Goldie Pekarskis. So, but Ela, I'll send you the information for the consulate.
Thank you all so much.
Avi, I want to thank you so much for such an inspiring talk. Rini, who Avi was referencing, is with the consulate's office. Many of you don't know who she is, but she's here on the call as well.
Rini at this point can give this talk herself. Truly, she's seen me speak so many times. I joke that I would
every single time. Every single time.
Avi Jorisch under Rini, she should just deliver the talk at this point.
No. Every single time he gives it, I'm like, whoa, best storyteller ever. And I've heard a couple. I just want to add that the consulate does have just my little commercial tonight. We do have an academic affairs director, and we do, we'll be more than happy to help you out with anything connected to Israel. So please reach out either via Sue or Goldie, and we'll put you in touch with the right people.
Thank you, Rini.
We'd love to. Thanks for being on.
Lashana Tova. Happy Healthy New Year to everybody. And thank you all so much for being here. It was a great way to spend the evening.
Yes, very interesting program. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you all. So I think I'm going to close it out, and I hope to hear from you all in the future where we can work together to repair the world.
Thanks,
Make it a
Shana
better
Tova.
place.
Shana Tova. Rini, if you could give me a buzz a little bit, that'd be great.
Sure, we'll do.
Thanks, everyone. Shana Tova. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Avi.
Thank you, Susan.
And Rini.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.